Y'all know what it is.
Hey there, and welcome back to an exciting 200th episode of Eggs. To celebrate this milestone, we are thrilled to have our special guest, the revolutionary DJ, Rob Swift. Born and raised in what would become the epicenter of hip-hop, Jackson Heights, Queens, Rob started his DJ career at the young age of 12, influenced by his brother and father, both DJs themselves. His education continued on the streets of 1980s New York City, where he was exposed to all kinds of music, from funk and jazz to old DJs like Grandmaster Flash and Grand Wizard Theodore. In 1991, Rob's career kicked into overdrive when he joined the groundbreaking turntablist crew, the X-Men, aka X-ecutioners, along with fellow legendary DJs Roc Raida, Total Eclipse, and Mista Sinista. He also won the DMC East Coast title that year. In addition to working with everyone from Linkin Park to the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Rob appeared as the resident DJ on ESPNU and has achieved an unheard of level of mainstream success. Today, he's still producing music, including his latest drop, For Heads That Break, with Shaughnessy Ice Cold in 2021, in addition to his popular blog and education programs, which are teaching the next generation of DJs how to master the trade. Here to talk about growing up a kid in 70s and 80s New York City, his incredible DJ career, the future of DJing and live music, and so much more. Please join us in welcoming to the show, DJ Rob Swift. Hey, Rob, how are you, man?
What up? What up?
Hey,
Great to be here.
Absolutely.
I appreciate the thorough and very clear and amazing and coherent introduction. I'm super humbled. And yeah, man, just to hear people talk about me and what I'm doing and what I've done, it's still a bit of a mind fuck. So thank you very much.
Well, I got to tell you, man, it was tough to cut it that short, right? I mean, you notice it stopped around 91 because if that maybe, if we kept going, I mean, the hits just keep on coming. So it was a tough one, but dude, we're really grateful to have you here. I also have to say, as a father, I'd be remiss if I didn't say so. My son Ethan texted me right before this, and he said, "Dad, are you having Rob Swift on today?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Make sure you let him know that XL with Large Professor is my favorite song." So anyway,
Wow.
14-year-old Ethan is a big fan of XL, and
that's amazing, man.
Yeah, right. And then I personally have to say, I loved It's Going Down. I was a big Linkin Park guy. I was touring with them in 2001 when they were just little guys, and so to see that a few years later, actually I saw you guys perform with them a few years later, and it was really cool to see that whole progression. So stoked to have you here.
Ethan is your son's name?
Yes, sir.
Ethan. Well, Ethan, if you're out there watching, thanks for the love, man. And I am super honored, man, that someone that young would even know who I am. It's a crazy feeling because I've been around for so long. So it just puts in perspective the different generations that I've managed to reach throughout my career. It's amazing.
Well, let's talk about that for a little bit. You had the opportunity to grow up in Jackson Heights, Queens in the 70s and 80s, and your father and brother were both DJs. How you essentially witnessed hip hop being born. Can you talk about that and just the early days of hip hop and how your career and your brother's career kind of was a part of that, really?
Yeah, right on. Well, I grew up in Jackson Heights, Queens in the 70s and 80s. New York City was a beacon for art, whether it was the punk scene or the hip hop scene. I feel like New York just gave birth to this renaissance and a new perspective on how to view music and artisticness. And by no means do I want people to think that when you said I witnessed hip hop being born, that I was at the park jams with Kool Herc and Grandmaster Flash. It wasn't in that sense, you know, like I was in Jackson Heights, Queens. The pioneers of this art form, the pillars of everything that I do were up in the Bronx. Yeah. And I was 8, 9 years old when hip hop hit the mainstream, when movies, well, I shouldn't say movies, but for example, the news started to document what these kids were doing in the Bronx. And then fast forward to me being 12 years old in junior high school, going to the Jackson Theater in my neighborhood to watch the showing of Wild Style, which is the first hip hop movie. So I wouldn't necessarily say that I was there physically at the park jams to witness this amazing culture birth, but my older brother was definitely there. He was going to the park jams. He was getting his hands on the cassette tapes that featured those park jams and DJs like Jazzy J, Grand Wizard Theodore, Grandmaster Flash, Africa Bambaataa, Tony Tone, Charlie Chase, cutting it up while MCs like the Fantastic Five Freaks, the Cold Crush Brothers, the Jazzy Five, Coke LaRock. My brother would sit me down and play me these cassette tapes and explain to me everything that the DJ was doing and why and how he was keeping time for his rappers to get busy, whether it was Flash and the Furious Five or Brown was the Theodore and the Fantastic Five Freaks. I had this, whereas now you could log on to my site, for example, Brolic Army DJ School, and sit down in the comfort of your living room and get lessons on how this art form evolved into what it is. I was with my brother getting schooled in a very organic grassroots way. And in that sense, I was young enough to see the growth of this amazing culture, specifically the art of DJing, till now, 2021. And it's online and I get to chat with cats like you and vibe the same way I vibed with my brother in my mom's living room on the couch over a cassette tape. Now we could have the same conversations via Zoom, which is amazing. So I have seen the different stages of this art form and I'm blessed because a lot of people now receive hip hop via YouTube or Instagram. I was going to park jams with my brother when I was old enough and watching these pillars perform. I remember I myself used to breakdance, you know, and battle kids. So I've dabbled in all of the elements of hip hop, b-boying, MCing. I to this day, if you ask me to, I could sit down and write a rhyme for you. I don't necessarily like my voice, so I'd be apprehensive about spitting it, but I could write rhymes. I tried the beatbox. I wrote graffiti. DJing is just what I was best at, and here I am today.
Yeah, no, I love that. It's, you know, it's fun listening to your stories of sort of, you know, hearing the cassette tapes and things like that your brother brought home. Like I remember just, and Mike probably has a similar experience of as I do, just sort of based on where we live geographically. But when I was a kid in the 90s and like what was going on in New York was happening in New York, and I was living in little Pocatello, Idaho. You know, I was a graffiti artist. And so I was really involved in sort of that hip hop scene as best as I could in Southeast Idaho, get into that scene. So I remember I used to get a bunch of like bootleg VHS tapes and stuff like that, all this stuff of like, you know, the kids out in New York doing graffiti and you know, the break beats and break dancing and all this kind of stuff and the DJ scene and all that. So it's one of the things that I think I appreciate the most of so much of your music is your music captures that era of New York for me. And, as somebody who didn't have the privilege, or I guess it was a privilege, I don't know, of living there, the way that I absorbed, or the way that I brought in New York into my life was totally different. And so it's really cool to sort of hear the similarity, like I too did try to make my own mixtapes and try to do all this kind of stuff, pulling down stuff, record something off the AM radio and dub it to a tape and all that kind of stuff, so it's fun to hear sort of your contemporary stories as somebody who did grow up there.
Right on, man. That's beautiful.
I don't know if you meet so many people, but we've met before. You came out to Salt Lake with Miles Lampshady a few years ago, and you performed. And
I remember.
I was actually in that battle that you judged.
Wow.
I did a mashup with Missy and Stevie Wonder, and I didn't expect to go to the second round. So my second set was crap. I wasn't ready. I didn't manage my time well enough to get a good solid set in. Mm-hmm. But that was my first time I'd ever seen you really perform. I never got a chance to see you back in the day with the X-ecutioners, or other than YouTube. And, I have followed your career before that, but that was the first live performance of something like that I have seen. And we've had other DJs on our show before, but most of them are club DJs and most of them are radio guys. And there is a huge difference between someone like you and a regular club DJ. And the difference is pretty much you get a show. You get it's your trick DJing, you're sampling, you're looping, you're doing all these different things that your normal nightclub DJ or radio guy isn't necessarily doing all the time. You're a battle DJ for a sense. Can you talk about what influenced you to want to be a battle DJ and go down that road rather than? I'm sure that the sampling and the battling, has a lot to do with where you grew up, but at the same time, it's kind of its own thing. Can you maybe break that down for us a little bit?
I think the short answer to your question revolves around the fact that I am one of those guys that likes to maximize their potential. So what I mean by that is, if you asked me right now to vacuum your carpet, I'm going to make sure that I get every speck, every piece of lint, every hair, every corner of that carpet. And I use that as an analogy to say, with regards to DJing, when I first learned how to perform my first scratch, for example, my brother put me on my dad's turntables, and he taught me how to move the record back and forth and coax sound. But for me, when I heard other people coax sound, but better than my brother, I then wanted to figure out what those DJs were doing. So my first example of what a hip hop DJ does was watching my brother on my dad's equipment in our living room cut up 2 copies of Walk This Way by Aerosmith, nice. Right? But I was also fortunate enough to live here in New York City, where you had access to radio shows like Red Alerts, Friday Night Show, Chuck Chill Out Saturday Night Show on 98.7 KISS. Then when you move the dial over towards the right and arrived at WBLS on Friday nights and Saturday nights, you had Mr. Magic and Marley Marl. And these guys were better than my brother, more refined. They had a wider record collection. What they were doing to the records was just a notch higher than what my brother was capable of. So now I wanted to learn what these 3 DJs were doing. So my point is, just the kind of person that I am, I always want to maximize my potential and learn as much as I can about a specific thing as possible. I'm just very geeky in that way. I like to know what I'm doing, the inside and out of it, the left and the right of it, the up and the down of it, every facet of whether it's DJing or art or editing. I've been getting into editing within the last few years, and I just like to maximize my potential. So I think because of that, I never stop learning. And to this day, I get inspired to teach myself new scratches, new ways of beat juggling. Although people out there might see me as this quote unquote master DJ or someone that's accomplished, I still consider myself a student. So because of that, I just wanted to learn how to manipulate the turntable as much as I possibly could. And when it comes to battling, that's what it's all about, is technique and skill. You know, you can't just let a record play and do a blend, you know, from one song to the next in a competition. You have to really alter the music that you're playing for people as much as you can so that you could stand out and possibly win said battle that you're in. So I think my nature as a person wanting to maximize my potential made it so that it was just the natural path for me. And thankfully, I made that decision to really level up with regards to my skills, because I was able to forge a career for myself and etch my name amongst other great DJs. And I mean, the reason why we're here talking is because of what I've accomplished in my earlier years and how that's propelled me to today. So battling for me was just another way of maximizing my potential, receiving inspiration from other DJs that were just as good as me. And now I'm on the same stage with them and I need to prove myself and stand out. All that just makes you push yourself. So
yeah, no, I think that's awesome. And thanks so much for that background. I wonder if you would sort of then talk about kind of the next steps, right? So how you applied this stuff. So, I mean, obviously you started learning at a young age, you started working on it. And because of this sort of, I guess, ingrained drive in you to keep achieving and keep doing better and more, how did that start to manifest into gigs and performances and ultimately into a career?
Yeah, it all happened very organically, and it was about me putting one foot ahead of the other and not thinking too far into the future. So when I first started DJing, I just wanted people in my neighborhood to know I DJ'd, and that was my way of developing my personality and my image. You know, on my block, for example, there was this kid named Carlos, and he was like the cute dude on the block that all the girls wanted to date. Then you might have had another friend of mine, Evaristo. He was just super athletic, right? And everyone knew if you were playing baseball in the parking lot or playing freeze tag, you wanted Evaristo on your team because he was always the fastest guy, the most agile guy. My brother was the bully of the block. So everyone was scared of my brother. You know, everyone had an identity. I wanted an identity, and DJing for me was a pathway to create myself. So that was the first step, creating myself, developing as a person via this music, because I wasn't necessarily the best breakdancer. I was a toy graffiti artist, and I hated my voice as a rapper. You know, I tried all these different things. I played sports, but I wasn't necessarily the standout kid on the block with regards to these different, whether it was athletics or creativity or just being a cute kid, right? But DJing was something that was unique to me that no one on my block could do as well as me, or at all, really. The only DJs in my neighborhood where I grew up in Jackson Heights, Queens, was myself and my brother. The other DJs came from the neighboring neighborhood of Corona, Queens, where the Mets played. Back then it was Shea Stadium. So we stood out, my brother and I, as the DJs of our neighborhood. And I, within months, ended up being better than my brother. So I saw how, because of that, people started to attach me with an image and a persona, so to speak. You know what I mean? And I just kept going with that. I wanted to grow that persona. So now it's not enough for people in my block to know who I was as a DJ. Now I want people at my junior high school to know. So I remember at my junior high school, they threw a dance and I asked the principal to let me DJ the dance. And he did. He paid me like $50. My brother and my dad helped me lug all of the equipment we had in the house to the gymnasium at our junior high school. And now kids at my junior high school knew I was a DJ. And then I graduated from junior high school, went to high school. Now people are asking me to DJ their parties. So gradually, little by little, one step at a time, I built a reputation, a persona, so to speak. And from there, it was like, all right, people in Corona, Queens, in Jackson Heights, Queens, in Woodside, Queens know who I am. I want the city to know who I am. So I started entering organized battles like the DMC. And now people from Brooklyn and the Bronx and Staten Island are going to one central space, a club at the Palladium in New York City, a small little intimate club in Brooklyn. And I'm competing against other people. And gradually, just one step at a time, you're doing things to propel your name, to push yourself. And to this day, I'm still doing it. Now I'm just doing it on a wider level, on a bigger platform like social media, Instagram. But it's about always putting one step ahead of the other and doing what you can to get your name, who you are, what you're about out there for people to see and embrace.
Yeah. Can you talk about the early years with the X-Men, how you guys kind of came together, how the group formed, and how important the crew is? Before the X-Men, there was a group called the Supermen, who I think you kind of looked up to. And then you got like the Scratch Pickles, the Beach Junkies, all those guys like that. They've formed these crews. And how important is that to progressing as an artist? Having someone else like that you consistently practice with, and kind of hold you accountable. That sounds to me like I used to do promoting back in Phoenix. I haven't been a DJ like with turntables for more than like 10 years. Before that, I did promotions and I worked with bands. And working with a band, you had 7 people all working kind of towards the same goal and trying to progress as a group. And I could see a crew, like a DJ crew, having the same kind of mentality and having the same kind of leverage that comes with having 7 different people working on something like that. And I see that as something that's could be very valuable.
Well, DJing is a communal art form.
See, I didn't see that early on in my career.
It really is. It really is.
The community that comes with hip hop is something that's new to me. I didn't know about like the Herc in Salt Lake and B-boy community and the actual scene that comes with hip hop. And I love it. Like, to me, it's everything amazing that I've been looking for. And
it's amazing.
The early part of my DJ, it's just me. And I'm looking at other DJs and I didn't have anyone that I could really bounce off of and work with. And if I had found a place like the Herc when I was a kid, I would have been in heaven. Like that would have been my, and I found it when I was 35, after 10 years is working as a DJ. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Interesting. No, I hear you, bro. Like I'm with you, you know what I mean? And the interesting thing about what you're talking about with regards to crews is a lot of people don't realize that hip hop is the extension of gangs. Like the people that are responsible for this culture, the pillars of this art form, a lot of them, before they became world-renowned DJs and MCs and breakdancers, were in gangs. And being in a gang is a form of camaraderie that you don't experience by yourself. You know, you are with your boys, you run together, and you fight other gangs, other rivals, other kids from other neighborhoods. There came a point where the pioneers of this art form realized that violence wasn't the way to express their energy, that they could respect each other's differences and showcase their differences in a more creative way without being violent. And hence the battles between crews like Cold Crush Brothers and Fantastic Five Freaks, DJs like Kool Herc and Africa Bambaataa. That was their form of expressing that, all right, we're different. I respect that we're different, but I'm better than you. And doing the whole macho, chauvinistic, for lack of a better word, who has a bigger dick kind of thing, but in a way that's healthy and expressive and not violent. You know, so hip hop evolved from gang culture.
Well, didn't BAM, like Zulu Nation, didn't it kind of start from the Black Spades?
Exactly. So when you reference crews like the Superman DJs, Clark Kent, DJ Scratch, Richie Rich, Tone Be Nimble, Plastic Man, Aladdin, these were the equivalent of what a gang would have been in the 70s, but instead of going around and beating people up, they're beating people creatively on the turntables. And the interesting thing about the X-Men was the X-Men was inspired by the Superman in that, you know, guys can relate to this. You're in high school, it's the beginning of the year, and there's a new guy that like moved into the neighborhood and now is going to your high school. And that new guy makes the decision, you know what? I want to be the popular kid. I'm not going to be marginalized here at the school. I'm going to beat up all of the tough guys at the school to make a name for myself. That's how the X-Men was birthed. The X-Men came together, Steve D, Sean C, Roc Raida, Johnny Cash, came together to battle the Supermen, who were the most feared DJs at the time. So again, that mentality, that gang mentality is now being expressed creatively through music. And you have one crew's skills being pit against another crew's skills. And the crew that triumphs ends up being the kings of that city, if you will. So the X-Men were like, yo, man, we're going to call ourselves the X-Men, a different comic book characters, in order to make a statement that we want to go against the Superman and battle them and let the world know, especially New York City, that those aren't the only DJs that can kill shit. And that's how all of these different crews started, man. That urge, that want to be known and be accepted and be respected. And all of that grew from gang mentality. So it's interesting. Now you have crews that might think, well, being in a crew is about everyone like being popular, but that's not necessarily the only aspect of being in a crew. A lot of times when you're in a crew, you help each other grow as DJs, because, for example, being in the X-Men, I knew that these guys were just as good as I was, and each day they were striving to get better. So that pushed me to practice as hard as I did and not settle and be complacent. So amongst you know, the idea of being with other guys that are like-minded and are DJs, and you could enter competitions together. A lot of it is just a motivating factor. Like, one guy is dope, now I want to be as dope as him, and you guys influence each other to practice.
No, I love that. And thank you for all this cultural background too, because I think it's a really cool part of the history of hip hop. I wanted to ask you though. So, I mean, as a guy from sort of Colombian descent, your parents are both Colombian, and you know, were there any problems with you sort of, I guess, working your way into this community that was largely based on sort of African-American culture and that sort of thing? Like, was there any sort of weird, I guess, sort of cultural differences? And also, like, what role did your cultural background play in your music? Like, I mean, I know that your dad was a merengue and salsa DJ. So like, I mean, you were clearly getting sort of like Latin influence and things like that. Mm-hmm. So like, what role did all that play in sort of your makeup as part of the X-Men?
The beauty of hip hop is it's a diverse form of expression. And there isn't one way to express yourself as a hip hop artist. We have 4 elements: the B-boy, the MC, the graffiti artist, and of course the DJ who birthed this whole culture. And within those 4 elements, you're taking influence from different areas. So if you're let's say a B-boy, right? If you look at someone like Ken Swift or Crazy Legs, and they're about to go down on the floor, you'll see them doing elements of salsa before they get down on the floor and do their footwork. If you're a graffiti artist, a lot of these guys are, in my opinion, like no different from, you know, Picasso. You know what I mean? Like, they're being influenced by the art world, not just one specific style of art, but the art world. If you're a DJ, you might, with regards to hip hop, you might be influenced by, let's say, jazz, Bob James, Take Me to Mardi Gras, but you'll also play music of the genre of funk or soul, Aretha Franklin, James Brown. So hip hop, what it means when you think of those 2 words, is just about being inclusive and diversified and not pigeonholing yourself to just one area of expression. So me being Colombian, I just stepped into the game and I was embraced because because of my background, I was able to bring another element to the experience that my friends were having with hip hop, whether it was DJs or rappers, graffiti artists. Because in hip hop, you bring your experiences to what you're doing, and that helps you stand out and not just be the average B-boy or the average DJ or the average rapper. You're bringing your experiences that are unique to you. So when you write a rhyme, but you've been exposed to things in Colombia that kids here in Queens haven't, and you're bringing that into your rhyme, now there's an element to your creativity that's just unique and different. So that, to me, is what's dope about hip hop, is it embraces everything. If it's dope, bring it in to the equation and let's learn from it and use it to be better. And for me, that's what true hip hop is. It's not just one way of looking at things or one way of expressing yourself. So it was nothing for me to be accepted by my crewmates, the X-Men. Although I was Colombian born, I'm still being creative in the same way that they are. I'm just coming at it from a different angle. And with hip hop, you embrace all angles.
Yeah, no, I think that's really great. And it's true just how inclusive sort of the whole hip hop culture is. I mean, if you think about all the different influences like you're describing, it's pretty cool. I mean, because it puts out kind of, hip hop in general has sort of that, I don't know, this kind of tough demeanor that can be a little bit intimidating or something, and but when you really break it down, it's true. But it is quite inclusive, and it's interesting. Like even just in the experience you're describing, there's some, I guess, sort of communal bit that we all sort of came from the same area, and we all sort of have lived through the same things. And we're, so it's like the superficial differences where mom and dad came from or whatever. Like none of that stuff matters. Like just show up and be cool.
It doesn't.
Like that's it.
Just show up, be cool, be creative, and be original. Those are the only things that I feel draw boundaries between people in hip hop. So if you're not creative, if you're coming into a situation and whether you're a b-boy and you're biting someone's moves, or you're a DJ and you're playing the records that another DJ is known for playing, if you're not unique and authentic, that's where the boundaries are drawn, and that's where you might be marginalized. And I'm talking about true hip hop culture, not what you see now, which is just people using hip hop and not being original for the sake of social media currency via likes and views, right? So I just want to grow my Instagram, so I'm going to copy this person's aesthetic. You can't do that coming from the roots that I did, because if you're biting someone, if you're copying someone else's style, you're not being original, and you're seen as a leech almost. Like you're just here to learn what we do and take it and get famous off it. So
I think that's the thing, right? It's sort of this two-way trade, right? I mean, it's you're supposed to be bringing your creativity and contributing it to hip hop, not just taking something out of it, right? So whether you're there as a graffiti artist or a dancer or an MC, the point is that you're bringing your skill, your creativity, your ideas, and throwing them all in the same pot, right? You're supposed to be contributing.
Exactly.
I think that's what you're saying is basically those boundaries show up when you're not contributing, when you're taking.
Right. When you're not contributing and you're taking, that's where the boundaries show up. It's not about where you're from. It's where you're at, to quote Rakim. Where is your mindset? Is your approach to being around this group of cool kids who all are dope DJs gonna be taking what they can do and trying to exploit it to be popular amongst other people? Or are you gonna take what they're doing, be influenced by it, and then elevate it, and then give back and say, hey, here's a new take on that scratch that you're doing, or hey, here's a new take on that beat juggle, or if you run with graffiti artists, hey, here's a new take on drawing these letters. What if we did this? Like hip hop is at its purest form a give and take of energy. So where I'm from, where your background, whether it's economical or your ethnicity, doesn't matter. Class and economics are the least of anyone that's into hip hop. It's the least of their worries. Yeah. It's, are you creative and are you able to, I guess, give back, and add on to the scripture that the pillars of this art form started in the 70s.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, right? It's an accumulative art form, right? Like it has to continually be built and added to. Like, you're not discarding things. Everything is being added to the pie. So I think that, as long as you're contributing and you show up, I mean, because, of course, people are going to have all kinds of level of skill or whatever, right? So it's not a judgment of good or bad and that kind of thing. Right. It's more, what are you bringing to the table and is your intention, right? So I think that's
exactly.
Fair.
So I was wondering if we could maybe jump back into the early years of the X-Men and talk about going into the studio as a crew and producing an album. I've worked with a few bands that have gone through the recording process, and usually it's a win-win-win, the whole thing. You come out with a finished product. Everyone in the group usually kind of comes together and they perfect their set during the recording process. Can you actually go through that? You're maybe the first time through, and then the second time when you actually had a budget, how that made a difference.
Yeah, well, we signed an independent deal in 1997 with a label called Astrodell Records. And for me, the beauty of that time period as recording artists, not kids that were entering sanctioned battles like the DMC and the New Music Seminar, was now we were in a recording studio and being given the opportunity to express ourselves through a different medium. There's just so much you can accomplish as a battle DJ. You could win a battle, make a name for yourself, and then you take that step and move forward into your career. And that's what we did when we signed our record contract with Astrodell Records. We wanted to, again, elevate ourselves, maximize our potential. And it was a great experience because it was our first album and the label gave us freedom to do whatever we wanted.
That's awesome.
It is super critical. And you know, another thing that's interesting about that experience was it's not like we were necessarily groomed or experienced recording artists. Also, when you couple the idea that Astrodell Records wasn't a hip hop label, they were more of an experimental label. So you had a label that was putting out avant-garde experimental music that knew nothing about turntablism, but was aware and hip to who the X-Men were. And then you had the X-Men who were inexperienced in the studio, but masters at putting together a battle routine. So it's like, no one really knew what was going to come of the first album, but that freedom was so genuine that we were just having fun. And that fun got us to complete an album that went on to be critically acclaimed and landed us a potential record deal with Rick Rubin. First, before we signed with Loud Records, Rick Rubin, who, I mean, I don't have to explain who he is. That said, I mean, he founded LL Cool J, produced songs like Peter Piper and Walk This Way for Run DMC, worked with artists like Jay-Z, Black Crowes, Red Hot Chili Peppers. This guy is like the Quincy Jones of producers. And he came to see us perform at a club in LA and was just moved and met us backstage and was like, I want to sign you guys to my label. Took us out to breakfast the next day. We told him we were going to sign the record contract. And then one of the original X-Men members, Sean C., who by now was an A&R at Loud Records, found out that Rick Rubin wanted to sign the group and intercepted the deal and got us to sign with Loud. So the album Expressions, our freshman work, just made so much noise that now major labels wanted to fuck with us. And I think the difference, to answer your question, between the first independent album by the X-ecutioners, Expressions, and the major label album, the sophomore piece of work built from scratch, was we had a bigger budget and higher expectations. So when we put together Expressions, there were no expectations. We were just taking
do
it
you
one
think
step
that
at a
was
time.
liberating? Do you think that actually helped the process by not having the expectations? Because when you go in the second time and have, you know, big dollars and people watching over your shoulders, it almost kind of hamstrings you, I think.
Definitely. I think that it was like we were putting together battle routines when we were recording expressions. We were just taking it one scratch at a time, one idea at a time. And we weren't concerned with selling records. We just wanted to make music with our friends. And if you listen to expressions, there are no big time features on the project. It's us and our buddies from around the way who could rap, who we wanted to give a chance and a platform for their voice to be heard. That's expressions in a nutshell. When we got to Loud, now we had expectations. We had this critically acclaimed freshman album, and we needed to top it. And we were given a huge budget, and we wanted to make that budget back for the label. And so that pressure definitely created more tension, to be honest with you, amongst the members of the group, because we didn't have that freedom and there wasn't those expectations. And it's like taking a test, man. Like, you could want to get a good grade, but just wanting to get a good grade is making you stressed out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And with regards to putting together Built from Scratch, it was more of a, fuck, man, like, this is Loud Records and Wu-Tang is on here and Big Pun and Mobb Deep, and we're DJs. And, you know, already at that time in music industry, although DJs are celebrated now today, at that time, we were still fighting for love and respect from the record industry, because when you saw a DJ and a rapper on stage or in a music video, the rapper was in the forefront. The DJ was just in the background, like, not really a part of the art as much as it was in the early stages of this art form growing what it is to be. Once hip hop became mainstream, the rapper got all of the attention and the DJ fell by the wayside. So we were like, man, we're DJs on this label with all these amazing rappers. We need to put together a project that's gonna show them that DJs are just as important to the music industry as the rappers are. And we successfully did that. But again, when you're working on music and you're putting those expectations on yourself, it's a little more stressful, you know? But that said, we had a lot of guidance. Our A&R was an original member of the X-Men. Big ups to Sean C. And he guided us through the whole experience. And we put together Built from Scratch. And then that was another critically acclaimed album. I think label-wise, things started to fall apart when we went to record the third album. By then, Loud Records didn't exist. And Sony Records, which was the big brother label to Loud, took the X-ecutioners and gave us a 1-album deal. And it was basically, let's see what you do with this album. And the difference with the third album, Revolutions, was the guidance wasn't there in the same way from the label that it was when we were on Loud. And as a result, we put together, at least we made our best efforts to put together a third banging album, but it just wasn't as powerful as the first 2 albums. You know what I mean? So I think the moral of the story there is being on a major record label isn't necessarily a good thing. Sometimes you could be on a label and the people, the staff, don't even care about you as an artist, you know? So I'm thankful for labels like Fat Beats, whom I've been putting out music with in the last couple of years. Their existence, all these years, I mean, they've had so much longevity as a record label in hip hop. and they still give back to the artists that they came up with. And I put my music out through them now. So I'm still here working on music, and I'm happy, but also appreciative of the experiences that I had with Sony, with Loud Records, obviously with Astrodell Records, because it helped me understand the music industry in a way that battling didn't.
Yeah, no, I think the one thing that's interesting, and I just kind of wanted to comment on it as you're going through here, during that built from scratch era, which was when I, personally was most, in love with the X-ecutioners, or most familiar through sort of my connection with Linkin Park and those guys. I think one thing that happened in that period is we were talking earlier about sort of this accumulation of things that make up what is hip hop. I think that was sort of maybe a new sort of, a precipice of a collaboration between sort of rock and hip hop and all that becoming one thing. I had seen you guys on one tour, with Linkin Park, Apex Theory, Head PE, some of these other guys. And, so I saw you both in that rap or rock environment. And then I also saw you guys on Anger Management tour with Eminem, Ludacris, and I was working with a band called Bionic Jive at the time. And, and so on both of those tours, I mean, dramatically different, right? We've got hip hop in the hip hop world, but then we also have hip hop in this rock world. And I think Linkin Park was one of these bands, and obviously there'd been others, like the Limp Bizkits of the world and stuff that had a lot of hip hop influence. But I think that Linkin Park was so big and took it to this other level where all of a sudden hip hop and, rock music and all this stuff, it just kind of became its own new thing. This was the evolution of hip hop. So I think that album, in particular, not to say that any one of them were any more impactful or influential than another, but I think that, that one hit America in a different way where all of a sudden, or maybe the world in a different way, where all of a sudden it really melded those two art forms. And so I think that album, maybe I'm not sure if it gets the due that it deserves, but I think it was really an impactful moment in music.
Are you talking about Hybrid Theory, the Linkin Park album, or Built from Scratch?
No, built from scratch. It's going down with Shinoda and Han.
It's going down, for sure. Man.
That song, they had already been, obviously Linkin Park had already been using a lot of hip hop in their stuff. I mean, Mike Shinoda is an MC, and Han was a great DJ, and so, but that I think sort of, I guess maybe legitimized them, right? So Linkin Park had their own thing, but like bringing them into something that was so, I guess, pure hip hop, right? This thing that was born in New York and had sort of grown up, and now here they are working together and collaborating like this, and it led to other amazing things too. I think it sort of influenced things like the Collision Course stuff and everything else. So I think that album was maybe more impactful than just the sound that you guys put down. I think that what it did for sort of the genre in general is maybe even bigger.
I agree 1,000%. You used the word legitimized, and I feel like Built from Scratch legitimized DJing for the world.
Yeah.
And I say this without fear of error. If it wasn't for what the X-ecutioners, Roc Raida, rest in peace, so do Eclipse, Mista Sinista, myself, Rob Swift, did with regards to putting together an album like Built from Scratch that featured artists, yes, like Linkin Park and Biz Markie and Everlast and MOP. We did it on our terms. And each song on that album was created and recorded through the lens of a DJ, not a rapper. And I think that's the beauty of Built from Scratch. The typical hip hop song, especially today, is composed through the lens of the rapper. So the rapper picks the producer. Nowadays, you're lucky to even hear scratches on the majority of hip hop songs that we hear on YouTube. But Built from Scratch was composed through the lens of DJs. So the DJ decided who was going to rap on the song, who was going to produce these songs, how we were going to market the album, how we were going to create the aesthetic of the album, the cover art, that was through the lens of a DJ, like it was back in the day with Kool Herc and Bambaataa and Grandmaster Flash. So I really feel, I am confident that Built From Scratch planted the seed for everything that is happening in the DJ community right now. And I don't say that in a boastful way. I say that in all honesty, in a genuine way, because a lot of people don't realize that by 1994, 95, and I'm talking about authentic hip hop, not rap or commercial hip hop or the bullshit that, you know, we associate commercialism with, right? I don't want to necessarily diss anyone specifically. But by 1995, I would say 15%, possibly less, of the music that was out featured scratches. A lot of the music by then, it was a rapper with someone singing in the hook and the beat. And you were lucky to hear scratches. Obviously, you still had Pete Rock putting out music, Premier, and those guys have stayed true to every element of this culture to this day. But a lot of people were going from being these dope DJs to now they're just producing, and they're not even owning turntables. You know what I mean? You go to their home studios and you see a SB1200 and a mixer and no turntable. We, the X-ecutioners, the X-Men, put DJing on our shoulders and not only continued in the battle scene, whether it was judging battles or still competing against other crews like the Invisible Scratch Pickles, peace to those guys. We were like, yo, man, we want the music industry to respect this more than they have. You know, DJing was marginalized from the moment Sugar Hill Gang released Rapper's Delight. You know what I mean? DJing was marginalized and it became about the rapper. Built From Scratch, I feel, was our statement to that mentality that DJing wasn't necessarily as important to the packaging of an album as rapping was. That was a refute of that mentality. And because of that, you have now DJing this billion-dollar industry, and you have companies designing mixers and DJ apps for people to DJ easier. And I am confident when I say, if it wasn't for Built From Scratch and what that album did, especially Linkin Park helping us with It's Going Down, I don't know if DJing would look the way it does now. And I'm not saying that we're the only dudes that helped this art form evolve to what it is now, but I am saying we did it on the grandest scale. You know, no other DJ crews were putting out major label albums.
Yeah. Around that same time frame that you were talking about, I mean, even not even hip hop, but well, it kind of is. Butterfly by Crazy Town, AM was scratching over that, you know? So, I mean, it's amazing how it from, you know, that short period of time, all of a sudden everything's got it on there. So it's interesting to see the evolution of music and the DJ in that process.
No doubt.
Speaking of technology and companies putting out mixers to make, you know, DJing easier, this and that. As someone who came from putting stickers on vinyl for cue points and loops to now having the ability to create a loop on the fly and use Serato and all this other stuff that's available out there, I'm sure you can weigh in a little bit about the benefits of the tech and kind of what it has its downsides too. Can you maybe weigh in a little bit on that just for us?
I think every aspect of life has two ends of the spectrum, the absolute negative and the absolute positive, right? So while people of my era tend to have an opinion towards technology that condemns it, because you're giving a beginner, someone that never touched a piece of vinyl, the ability to trigger sounds and make it sound like they're backspinning, right? While technology does that, technology also facilitates an avenue for experienced DJs like myself to push the boundaries of creativity farther, right? There's but so much you could do with a piece of vinyl. And as much as I appreciate the creativity that I put into developing and constructing and creating routines like Nobody Beats the Biz, Welcome to the Terradome, on just vinyl, no assistance from a laptop or a mixer with effects, right? I also appreciate the fact that I could go back to those old routines and give them a different, I don't know, like a different, so for example, I could revamp a lot of the older routines because now I can. For example, here's a great example. The bridge Public Enemy routine, I don't know if people who are watching are familiar with it, but I have a routine with these two songs, right? Public Enemy #1 is Public Enemy's first single, and it starts off with this buzz sound, and there's a point in the introduction of the song where this buzz sound plays out for about 3 seconds, and then Chuck D starts rhyming. On the instrumental, again, the buzz sound plays for 3 seconds. You don't hear Flavor Flav talking in the background. Then the drums kick in. I came up with this idea before Serato, before laptops, before the fancy mixers that exist today, to use a piece of tape, as you referenced earlier, place the tape on the Public Enemy 12-inch strategically so that when the needle of the turntable hit the tape, it skipped backwards and looped this buzz sound.
I'm glad you brought that up, because for someone who hasn't seen it, it's hard to visualize that you're actually jumping the needle back to create that loop. And the first time I saw someone do that, it blew my mind. I'm like, what the hell? Yeah, just the technology change. And now you could do that on the fly. You could set it, okay, I want this, and hit a button and it's done. And being able to do that instead of having your tape and cutting it with an X-acto knife so it does exactly what you want, it changes the game. And also
it does.
Learning how to use vinyl, you get a lighter hand. If your needle skips, you kind of, there's just something that you learn from it that you couldn't get from just doing Serato or controller. Or
yes, limitations sometimes force you to reach your full potential. You got to push through those limitations and find out, wow, I did this. I came up with the idea of taking a piece of tape, making the needle skip physically. And now I'm going to take The Bridge by Marley Marl and MC Shan and add drums to this melody that I'm changing on the pitch control from the turntable. Like, when you think of all that, someone listening to us have this conversation may not appreciate that I needed to be in a certain mental space to receive that idea and then put it into practice, right? Now you have a DJ app that within seconds allows you to loop that melody that only lasted for 3 seconds on vinyl. But here's the flip side to that. On many occasions when I did that routine, because the routine requires me to put the fader in the middle so that I can create the melody on the record that's being skipped on purpose physically with a piece of tape, and add drums to it on the opposite turntable, for you to hear both sides, I have to put the fader in the middle. But if you're in a venue with a bad sound system, you're going to get a lot of feedback. And that's what happened to me a lot of the times that I would showcase that routine. I would get feedback, and it was frustrating for me because you'd hear wah, wah,
Yeah.
and this rumble, right?
Yeah.
Now with Serato, for example, I do that routine and there's absolutely no feedback because it's all digital. So you hear the routine exactly as I intended for you to hear it. That's just one example of how technology does facilitate a pathway for DJs like myself to be more creative, do more things live on stage without having to deal with the analog issues of turntables and vinyl. So every aspect of every part of life has two spectrums, the negative and the positive, you know, and you just got to try to focus on the positive. So DJs out there listening to this, if you're starting out and you have the money to buy the controllers and the DJ apps, I'm not saying don't do it, but understand that if you rely on the technology to do half of the work for you, you're not necessarily experiencing DJing in the way it was intended.
Yeah, I love that. And thanks, Rob, for all that. I think that's amazing. And I think you're right that, you know, sometimes working within restrictions actually does make us stronger. You know, it sort of forces us to work, you know, in a different way. And so I think that that's great that you sort of showcase both experiences. So as we're sort of here in the home stretch, in fact, we've gone a little bit long with you. Let's get a little bit of just, you know, what you're doing today, where people can engage with you online and how they can get involved with what you're doing.
Right on, man. Right now, I'm just ecstatic and happy to say I launched my own DJ school. It's online. It's called Brolic Army DJ School. You log on and I have multiple courses, I would say about 8 right now, on developing your skills as a DJ, from courses dealing with the very initial aspects of dropping on the one, what that means, what it feels like, hand mechanics on the record, to advanced techniques like beat juggling, composing your own battle routines. And in between, I impart a lot of history of this art. One of the things that I feel separates my teachings from, because there are other DJ schools that exist. It's not like mine is the only one. But one thing I pride myself on with regards to Brolic Army DJ School is that I really go in depth regarding the history of this art form. A lot of people know what a baby scratch is, but they don't know who created it. Yeah, and why and how. A lot of people can execute a perfectly done flare scratch, but don't understand the origins of the flare. So earlier today, we were talking about my longevity in this culture, how I've seen it grow from the 70s to now. And I think that is a power that I have. And as they say, knowledge is power. And because of that, I'm able to make my lessons that more special. You know what I mean? Because you can learn a technique. If you don't have context, then you're just copying what someone is telling you to copy. But when you have context, you learn the technique and then you articulate it in a way that's personal to you, because now you understand that these techniques are personal to the people that created them. So I'm just super excited about the website. I want to give a big shout to the Brolic Army students that are subscribing to the website and taking in all I have to impart with regards to DJing. I'm working on music right now as well. I'm putting together a new EP with my boy, The Real DMT, and we plan on releasing it mid-May. Working on a single right now for it. It's called Halls of Karma, and Fat Beats is going to put it out for us. So I'm just keeping busy, man, and I'm thankful to still be relevant in this culture, and DJing has just been just great for my life, man. It's helped me, as I was saying earlier in this interview, develop as a person, create myself, and I'm still doing it.
Yeah. I love that you put the history with your lessons, because like you said, that is so critical. You really need to know where you came from before you can get to where you're going. And I've seen the results of your lessons and teaching people. I used to hang out with Miles all the time, and he's one of your former
Miles, Lab
students.
Shady. Yes.
Yeah.
Yo, Lab Shady, I got to give him a shout, man, since you referenced him. Miles and I linked up on YouTube. He was watching tutorials on how to elevate your technique, specifically create battle routines, and within battle routines, execute the beat juggle patterns. At the time, Miles was scratching, but he didn't quite understand the concept of beat juggling. And people know me for what I've contributed to DJ art as a beat juggler predominantly. So he was watching a lot of my YouTube videos. We're talking like winter of 2016. I was uploading my lessons with students. People would come to my house, I'd film the lesson and then upload it to YouTube so that other people had access to this information. Because with DJing, man, we share, we're sharers. And I wanted to share my content with people that didn't live in New York, like Miles, who was in Utah, but wanted to learn. And he got my email from my YouTube channel, messaged me and was like, yo, man, I see that you teach lessons. I'd love to learn from you, Rob. Could we maybe set up some lessons on Skype? Within days, we started training on Skype. This is now March of 2016. By November, Miles was a beast. Lamp Shady, he was a beast. So we're talking March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October. Like 8 months later, this guy was creating his own battle routines and developing a set that he was going to take into the DMC the following year. And this is 2016. He entered his first DMC competition, 2017. He went to LA and made it past the preliminaries and got into the finals. I believe he placed third in the LA heat of the DMC. And we're talking under a year of experience putting together a battle set, man. So
and for those of you that don't know, that don't know what the DMC is, it is probably the hardest battle out there.
Yes,
well,
for
there's
sure.
a few on that level, but technically wise, it is the hardest out there.
It's the hardest. Yeah.
So
for Lamp Shady to do that, be ready after 8 months of training on Skype, not even in person, it just goes to show the beauty of technology, that now we do have access to this information. And what took me from the age of 12 to 19 to master and understand took Miles 8 months.
yeah,
you know what I'm saying? So
it's incredible.
And that is the beauty of Brolic Army DJ School, man, is I'm taking my experience training with people across the country and the rest of the world and condensing what I've learned after 6 years of training people into these courses that you have access to.
Yeah.
On
And not
my
only
website, man. So
not only that, you're creating a community, and
on, man.
All the DJs in the Brolic Army, they get to know each other, and then you have battles within the community as well. So I just love everything that you're doing.
Battle.
So
yeah, man, the Brolic Army battle, that's my way of providing my students a platform to now showcase what they learned, because a lot of DJ schools will teach you the techniques and then that's it. So what, you're gonna only post videos of yourself for 60 seconds on IG and wait for people to like the videos? Nah, like I want my students to now take those techniques and grow and showcase what they've learned and inspire other people. So I put together my annual Brolic Army Civil War Battle for Supremacy, and I make it like the battles that I had with my crew, the X-Men. We used to battle each other in preparation for the DMC, for the new music seminar battle. We used to compete at each other's houses and draw up score sheets and give each other points. And I just wanted to do something that was reminiscent of that, man. So you're right. Brolic Army is more than a school. It's also a community. And that's what I have going on right now, man. That's what I'm channeling my energy into, man. My music and my teachings.
I love that.
Well, cool, Rob. Well, thank you so much, man. We really appreciate the time, and I'm glad we were able to connect. We had some technical problems in the beginning, so I'm grateful it worked out. So, but thank you so much for all your time. Real pleasure visiting with you.
Yes, sir. Big shout out to Ethan and yourselves. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Rob. And thanks so much to everybody who tuned into this spectacular 200th episode. We're grateful for all the support from the Eggs community and from everybody, who supports the show. So without any further ado, we'll see you all next time.